It's a great honor for me to be here at the Empire Club of Canada today, which is arguably the most famous and historically relevant speakers podium to have ever existed in Canada. It has offered its podium to such international luminaries as Winston Churchill, Ronald Reagan, Audrey Hepburn, the Dalai Lama, Indira Gandhi, and closer to home, from Pierre Trudeau to Justin Trudeau. Literally generations of our great nation's leaders, alongside with those of the world's top international diplomats, heads of state, and business and thought leaders.
It is a real honor and a distinct privilege to be invited to speak to the Empire Club of Canada, which has been welcoming international diplomats, leaders in business and in science and in politics. And when they stand at that podium, they speak not only to the entire country, but they can speak to the entire world.
Good afternoon, fellow directors, past presidents, members, and guests. Welcome to the 118th season of the Empire Club of Canada. My name is Kelly Jackson. I'm the president of the board of directors of the Empire Club of Canada and vice president, external affairs and professional learning at Humber College. I'm your host for today's event with the Honorable Karina Gould, the Minister of Families, Children, and Social Development. I'd like to begin this afternoon with an acknowledgement. I am hosting this event within the traditional and treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the homelands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wyandot peoples. In acknowledging traditional territories, I do so from a place of understanding the privilege my ancestors and I have had in this country since they first arrived here in the 1830s. As farmers in southwestern Ontario, I imagine they felt a deep connection to the land, and yet likely did not recognize how that connection was built in the placement of others. Delivering a land acknowledgement for me is always an important opportunity to reflect on our human connection and responsibility to care for the land. To recognize that to do so, we must always respect each other and acknowledge our histories. We encourage everyone tuning in today to learn more about the traditional on which you work and live. The Empire Club of Canada is a nonprofit organization, so I now want to take a moment to recognize our sponsors who generously support the club and make these events possible and complimentary for our supporters to attend. Thank you to our lead event sponsor, LiUNA. Thank you also to our season sponsors, the Canadian Bankers Association, LiUNA, Waste Connections of Canada, and Bruce Power. Before we get started, just a few quick housekeeping notes. I want to remind everybody who's participating today that this is an interactive. Those attending live, I encourage you to engage. Take advantage of the question box you will see below your on-screen video player. We have reserved time for a Q&A period with the minister after her remarks. We also invite you to share your thoughts on social media using the hashtags displayed on screen throughout the event. If you require technical assistance, please start a conversation with our team using the chat button on the right-hand side of your screen. To those watching on demand later, and to those tuning in on the podcast, welcome. It's now my pleasure to call this virtual meeting to order. I'm honored to welcome today's guest to the Empire Club of Canada's virtual podium. The Honorable Karina Gould is Minister of Families, Children, and Social Development. She was first elected as the Member of Parliament for Burlington in 2015 and has previously served as Minister of International Development and Minister of Democratic Institutions. A graduate of McGill University and the University of Oxford, Minister Gould is passionate about helping Canadian families, public service, and international development. If you'd like to learn more about Minister Gould, you can find her full bio on the page below the video player on your screen. A very warm welcome to Minister Gould. Minister Gould, please, over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kelly, for that warm introduction and that welcome to the Empire Club and all of those listening today. It is such a pleasure to be able to speak with you about the progress we have made creating a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system. I am speaking to you today from my home in Burlington, which is located on the traditional territory of a diverse group of First Nations peoples, including the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Attawandarak, and Mississaugas of the Credit. Thank you to the Empire Club for hosting us virtually here today. The Empire Club's role in providing a forum for discussion of issues of interest to Canadians is vital. It has, without a doubt, been a difficult year. The pandemic has changed our lives and our plans in dramatic ways. I myself am at the tail end of isolation after a positive COVID-19 test result. My husband and 4-year-old are at home as well, and they're not too happy about it. Oliver would much rather be at daycare with his friends, his amazing educators, and all the great resources the daycare has. And if I'm honest, his parents would also like that too. I know many of you have felt this struggle during lockdowns, during periods of homeschooling and asynchronous learning. As so many of us already knew, working and parenting at the same time is pretty hard. It is a bit tragic that it took a pandemic for our society to realize what parents and advocates have known for over 50 years. Access to quality learning and early childcare is a universal issue. It has significant impacts across all sectors, regions, and income brackets. The realities of the pandemic have made clear that high quality, inclusive, flexible, and affordable childcare is not a frill. It is a necessity for families across the country, and it is an economic imperative. So, last April, in the federal budget, we announced a commitment of $30 billion to build an affordable, high-quality early learning and childcare system across Canada. $30 billion. In fact, it was a transformational commitment. And with agreements in place with 12 provinces and territories, it means we're almost there to deliver affordable, quality, inclusive, and accessible care to children from coast to coast to coast. We have seen such amazing cooperation between federal, provincial, and territorial governments and our Indigenous partners. We have now signed agreements with 9 provinces and 3 territories to reduce fees, grow the workforce, build high-quality spaces, and ensure educators are better supported. We found common ground on the thing we all care most deeply about: giving our children, wherever they live, the best possible start in life. And while there are similarities in the agreements, there was no one-size-fits-all solution. We committed from the outset that the federal government would be a collaborative partner. Every agreement is distinct while building on the common goals we all share. We agreed that we needed to create more spaces to ensure access and address wait lists, and lower fees quickly by at least 50% by the end of 2022, and to $10 a day on average by 2025-26. Many agreements will get to $10 a day well before then. We also agreed that childcare deserts, where no childcare options exist, need to be addressed. We agreed that the educators who care for our children need better pay, enhanced benefits, and access to professional supports. Without educators, there is no system. 6 months in, we have been able to reach these 12 agreements from coast to coast to coast because we knew there would be tremendous benefits for our children, for families, for women, and for the economy. So let's start with families. Since July, because of our childcare agreements, parents in 5 provinces have seen the fees they pay for daycare reduced significantly. In Saskatchewan, parents saw their fees reduced by 50% in November, saving up to $395 every month. Alberta announced a 50% fee reduction in January, and in Nova Scotia, we announced a 25% reduction in childcare fees retroactive to January 2022, saving parents on average $200 per month, per child. And this is just the start. The relief and support these savings offer parents of young children cannot be overstated. For many families, daycare fees have been the size of a mortgage payment, placing massive strain on the family budget. This is in addition to the actual mortgage, which, as we know, is also a growing expense in much of Canada. I have heard from families across the country, parents of twin babies in Manitoba who are unable to find spaces to keep both children together, A Nova Scotia mother who struggled to find care for her son near her home despite being on every single wait list. The stories of parents across Canada and the stress and financial worry they face because of inadequate, unaffordable, and often unavailable care for their kids are legion. Imagine if you were a single parent making $52,000 and you suddenly got to take home an extra $600 a month. Just sit with that for a moment. That's the new minivan you couldn't afford. That's a sports camp, music lessons, a new winter coat for both the kids, groceries, a bike, a dinner out for a special birthday, a babysitter for a long overdue date night, monthly savings. For Michelle in Alberta, it meant accepting a full-time position after years of staying part-time because of daycare costs. For her family, that meant a more financially secure present and future. We are also working with provinces and territories to build new, high-quality childcare spaces for all families, including families with children with disabilities or children needing enhanced or individual supports. Every parent, no matter where they live, will have access to affordable, inclusive early learning and childcare. That is why it's good for families. For women, this is a no-brainer. If childcare is too expensive or unavailable, more often than not, it is women who stay home. We have seen thousands of women leave the workforce to raise a family or take on a reduced workload to provide childcare. In some families, that's a choice that a mom or another parent can take. But for many women, there was no choice. It was out of their hands because there were not enough spaces or the fees were simply too high. I just spoke with a mom in Sudbury who wanted to go back to work after her 12-month maternity leave. But because she was unable to find an infant spot anywhere in Sudbury, she had to extend her leave to 18 months. That was not her choice. The longer working mothers are out of the workforce, the harder it is to get back in and advance in a career with all the social and economic benefits that success in the workplace offer women and families. However, when childcare becomes more affordable and spaces become more accessible, women have more opportunities to pursue their career, to make more money, to improve circumstances for themselves, their children, their families, and to grow and support the economy. We need only to look at Quebec, where the provincial government has been investing in high quality, accessible childcare for over 2 decades. As of 2020, Quebec mothers with young children had a labor market participation rate of nearly 82%. In fact, Quebec women with children under the age of 3 have some of the highest employment rates in the world. If women in the rest of Canada participated at the same level as Quebec, it would add approximately 240,000 workers to the labor force in today's terms. 240,000. It is not simply a matter of being able to go out to work, but the impact reliable childcare has on careers and long-term earning capability. This is feminist economic policy, which is smart economic policy. As women enter the workforce and advance their careers, they have more opportunities to support and improve the economy. As parents have access to affordable childcare, they feel less uncertain about the future and consider purchasing that new car or that new home. Canadian women were already measurably absent from the workforce prior to the pandemic. Scotiabank's Global Economics Fiscal Pulse suggested that in September 2020, 70% of mothers reported working less than half of their normal hours relative to September 2019. Parents struggled throughout the pandemic to maintain their connection to the labor market and juggle childcare responsibilities. That's why our childcare plan is so important. Access to childcare promotes greater gender equality in the labor market, which also results in an economy that is more productive, more competitive, and more dynamic. The OECD report, Is the Last Mile the Longest?, shows that improvement in gender equality and family-friendly policies has boosted growth in GDP per capita by between 10 and 20%. In Sweden, female employment rates increased by almost 30%. TD Economics has pointed to a range of studies that show that for every dollar spent on early childhood education, the broader economy receives between $1.50 and $2.80 in return. The International Monetary Fund has estimated that closing the participation gap between Canadian men and women in the workforce could lift Canada's GDP levels by 4% in the medium term. That's $92 billion. These are just the near-term economic benefits. I'm also really interested to see how this impacts long-term economic security, particularly for senior women in Canada. As more women stay in the workforce, what will this mean for their retirement security? As more children have access to high-quality early learning and childcare, more women have access to the workforce and the ability to advance their careers. Not only does it provide more opportunities for women to be more competitive, it also provides more opportunities for those considering entering the early learning and childcare workforce. We rely on our childcare providers to create a safe and loving environment for our children, and I am grateful for their compassion, patience, and care every single day. It is estimated that 34,000 to 43,000 early learning and childcare workers will be needed once our Canada-wide system is in place. That is why a significant pillar of our system is supporting the workforce and providing them with the tools, services, and competitive wages to succeed. And as you know, there is still one large piece missing to complete this Canada-wide system, and that, of course, is Ontario. I am optimistic because I know that our Ontario colleagues share that common ground with every other province and territory. They want the best possible start in life for all the province's children. We have set aside Ontario's fair share, $10.2 billion, and we are ready to sign an agreement that meets our objectives on fee reductions, space creation, workforce support, quality, and inclusion. Parents in other provinces are already benefiting from our plan and saving hundreds of dollars a month. And those provinces and their economies will soon start to see the benefit that childcare provides. There is no reason for parents in Ontario or the economy or the Ontario economy to be left behind. This is a plan to drive economic growth, to enable parents, especially mothers, to enter, maintain, and re-enter the job market, and to offer each child in Canada the best possible start in life. Thanks to the spirit of cooperation we have experienced from our provincial, territorial, and Indigenous partners, we are well on the way to a transformational Canada-wide system that supports children and parents now and for generations to come. Thank you, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Minister Gould. Wow, it's, I guess, just about 10 months, and think about all that's been accomplished in that time is pretty incredible. I think, in terms of questions, I've got a lot, so we're going to just jump right in if that's okay.
Yeah, great.
I think the first one, I guess it's just for those who aren't as familiar with some of the mechanisms in place and some of the ways in which the collaborations happen with the provinces to sign the agreements. Just walk us through, how the funding actually, how does it trickle down to parents? So is it in the form of subsidies that people are receiving in the provinces, for example, where you've already talked about parents seeing those fee reductions happen? Or are they going directly to the operators who then reduce the fees? Sort of just, maybe the answer is it's different in different places, I don't know. So could you just give us a little bit more insight into sort of how does it actually work?
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea is that the upfront cost will be reduced, right? So it's not supposed to be a subsidy in that sense that you pay upfront and then you get a rebate. The idea is that by the end of the 5 years, you are paying, on average $10 a day upfront. So for example, in Alberta, what has happened is the Alberta government has transferred funds through the operating costs to the providers so that the parent, their bill is 50% less than it was the month before, starting in January. In Nova Scotia, because they're implementing the fees as of April, but retroactive to January, they've actually given a couple of different options for parents. So they can kind of use it as a credit for future payments, or they can get it like a lump sum payment for the previous 3 months. So the idea is that at the end, when the system is up and running, the parent, then the family or the caregiver just pays the average of $10 a day at the outset. But in the interim, different provinces are using different mechanisms to make that happen.
So it's pretty incredible to hear about some of the provinces where there have been significant fee reductions already. Do you have a sense of when sort of that next kind of tranche of provinces might also people be able to see them come to play in that?
Yeah, well, they're rolling out quickly. There'll be a couple. I can't give you I can't, break the news before it happens, but there'll be a couple more announcements this month, which I'm excited about. I think actually one later this week, so that'll be great. And every province and territory with whom we've signed an agreement is really eager to make this happen. So it's great that we've done it in 5 so far. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, it's really cool to hear from people what a difference it's making in their lives when they get that fee reduction.
Absolutely. I think it's when you spoke and you give the examples, right, of when you start to think about what $600 a month might mean for somebody, a family, what does it mean for a parent, what does it mean for a family? It really does take it down to that individual level, and you can see the power, right, of that investment, right, and what that could start to mean for people. But you also touched on the She session, and the idea of how the pandemic has hit mothers, and particularly hard in terms of labor market participation. And so I'm just wondering, when you talk about this idea around 240,000 women who, possibly could be re-entering the workforce or entering the workforce, how do you see that playing out as you go out and talk to people across the country? Because I work in post-secondary, all I hear about all the time right now is a huge war for talent.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we all know in Canada that there is a huge gap in our labor force right now. I mean, we are experiencing a major shortage, and we have this talent pool right here at home that could be entering the labor force if the conditions were right. And I talked about a little bit Quebec's experience, but what is so striking about Quebec is that in 1998, when they introduced affordable daycare across the province, they went from having the lowest female workforce participation in the country to having the highest. And so that when the conditions are right and the evidence shows it, that women will go back to work. And as I talked about in my remarks, there's often, I think, this false argument about choice, because yes, for some people it is a choice, but for many people it isn't, because they're saying, well, I could put my entire paycheck towards paying for daycare, right? Or I could stay home with the kids, because economically it actually doesn't make a difference for me, right? Or for some people, they say, I can't even afford to put my child in daycare, and so therefore I have to stay home, or I don't have a spot that's available because there's just not enough spots available. And as a mom myself, I mean, I remember dropping my child off at daycare that first day. It's scary, right? And it's amazing because we have incredible ECEs who take care of our children, but it's still hard as a parent to do it. And of course, I'm so grateful for everything that they do. But there are significant barriers right now, particularly for parents, but particularly for mothers, when it comes to accessing daycare and what that means for their family's bottom line. And so here is an incredible opportunity to tap into this workforce that is available, that's talented, that's probably trained already, and who can step in when the conditions are right. And so I think there's a really exciting opportunity and story here in terms of labor force participation for women, but also for Canada's economy, and what it means for women as they progress in their career. And maybe I'm rambling a bit too much, but one final point here, because we often talk about, the thinner echelons of leadership for women? Well, when you're asking women to take, big chunks of time out of their career, it then gets harder to progress into your career. And so if you take away some of those barriers as well, we're going to see more women in leadership positions because they're going to be staying in those careers longer as well. So I think there's a huge win here, and I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as somebody who was fortunate enough to be able to find childcare, I have a 6-year-old daughter. And when I think back and knowing that I was able to find childcare at the time, it was a great place. A shout out to the Seneca College Early Childhood Lab School, giving her a great start. But I wouldn't be in the role that I'm in today if I hadn't had that opportunity. If I just look back how my own career progressed, so I think can say I have that firsthand experience. It's not just also like anecdotal; it's true, right? That we see this time and time again. And to your point, the stats bear it out, right? Around being able to participate if that's what you want to do, and being able to move forward in ways and have opportunities open up for you. You did say something in your remarks that I thought was interesting. It was an expression, I wrote it down, childcare desert. I have come across that term before. And I just wondered if you could unpack that one a little bit and talk a little bit about that, because obviously Canada is a huge country, a lot of diversity in rural, urban, all sorts of community supports or not. And just wondering sort of what you've seen in your role around where are those childcare deserts, and how are the provinces trying to address them with you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it basically, as the phrase connotes, it's the space where there is no childcare available, and this could be in an urban center. It could be particularly in remote communities. We see it. When I was having conversations with counterparts in Nunavut, and during the announcement in Nunavut, there are some very remote communities where there is no licensed childcare available, and that's very difficult for a community. And so how are we working with provinces and territories to ensure that there are childcare spaces available right across the country? And so this has been another issue that folks have raised, in the sense of, well, childcare is an urban issue. It's not a rural issue. Well, I know that's not true, because I've spoken with rural families who either use childcare or would like to have childcare available for them. And it's making sure really that each province and territory is ensuring that there are childcare spaces being created right across their jurisdiction, and looking at the unique needs that they have as well. There are incredible providers right across the country that provide care that's tailored to the needs of their community. But part of what we're doing is providing those startup costs in areas where there is no childcare available, and so making sure that provinces and territories have the resources that they need and are responding to the needs of the community. So in the north, for example, one of the big challenges is infrastructure. There are simply places that don't have space to create a childcare setting. And so what are we doing to work with them to make sure that as we're thinking about community infrastructure, that we're thinking about childcare in that as well? So those are some examples that we're doing in the north. We also work, we have a separate program called Indigenous Early Learning and Childcare, where we have 3 distinctions-based agreements with the Inuit, the Métis, and First Nations about providing tailored childcare needs that is led by Indigenous communities and that is responsive to their needs, is distinctions based, and is grounded in Indigenous culture and language. So it really is, as you said, it's varied, it's diverse. Canada is vast, has many different communities with many different needs. And the objective of this Canada-wide early learning and childcare system is to create a system that meets the needs of children and families right across the country.
So I know, just picking up on that about the needs, I know you said in your remarks specifically, this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. I think it is fair to say that some critics, right, have said you're pushing for licensed childcare here. There's, a huge amount of childcare delivery that's happening across the country that doesn't necessarily fit sort of a particular model. So in the end, what does this ultimately mean for choice for parents? And how does that play out? So I'm not sure. I'm sure I'm not the first person to ask you that. How do you respond to that kind of criticism? Because you're saying it's not one size fits all.
Yeah, well, and it's not. So if you look at the agreements that we've signed, the 12 agreements to date, they're all a little bit different because in the absence of having a Canada-wide system and plan, different provinces and territories have done things differently over the past, 150 years, I guess, right? And so because of that, we've responded. So for example, in Saskatchewan, the vast majority of childcare is home-based. And so, a lot of what the government of Saskatchewan is doing is to try and bring that home-based care into the licensed system. And so one of the reasons why they retroactively reduced fees in November back to July was to say, if you're a home-based provider and you want to become licensed, then as you go through this licensing process, your parents will then be eligible for these fee reductions. I feel very strongly about licensed care. I think it's really important. We want to make sure safety and security, but also the quality of the education that our children are getting. And that's why this isn't just a childcare plan, it's an early learning and childcare plan, because it really is a continuum of growth and development. And we know from extensive research that the most important years for brain development are between 0 and 4. And so as we want to ensure that parents and caregivers have a safe place for their children to be watched while they're at work, we also want children to be developing as well. And so that's where that quality piece is really important for us. But we are, working with different provinces and territories based on, the experience that they've had to date and how we can bring this into the system as a whole.
You may have seen me glancing down here a little bit, and it's because I'm getting the audience questions in, and they are and fast and furious. So I guess I kicked it off by saying I had a lot of questions, but it looks like I'm not the only one. So I'm going to turn to a few of those. So first up, I've got looks like a couple questions here from Brendan at the Toronto Star. So he would like to know, he says, you recently told today's parent you're still waiting on Ontario to, quote, do its homework, end quote, and submit a plan for their share of funding. Can you elaborate on that? And what exactly are you waiting for them to do?
Sure. Sneaky, Brendan, that you're asking questions during this, but fair game. Okay, so look, we've signed agreements with 12 provinces and territories to date. As you mentioned, Kelly, we launched this 10 months ago. I mean, this is pretty extraordinary in terms of how quickly we've been able to advance. And the exciting thing about this is that parents in 5 provinces and territories are already experiencing fee reductions. That's pretty amazing for the speed of government normally. And what we did last July is we sent the allocation of that, the $30 billion over 5 years that we'd put aside for provinces and territories. We sent the allocation that was available to each province and territory. And so every province and territory got an allocation based on a formula of their 0 to 12 population. And we said, based on this allocation, we expect that in order for you to receive it, that you show us a plan of how you're going to reduce fees by 50% by the end of 2022, how you're going to get to $10 a day by 25-26, how you're going to increase the number of spaces available for children in your province or territory, what you're going to do for workforce supports, and how you're going to ensure quality and inclusion in your childcare and your early learning and childcare initiative. And what happened was 12 provinces and territories responded with what they're going to do. And then we signed agreements with those 12 provinces and territories. We are still waiting on Ontario to send us their plan on how they would meet those objectives. And that's the homework that we're still waiting for. I am very keen to receive it because that's how we get to an agreement, because it's $10.2 billion that is Ontario's fair share. It's their allocation from the federal funding. That's a significant amount of money that will go a long way to helping parents with the high costs of daycare in this province. And it will go a long way to creating more spaces, hiring more ECEs, paying them better, and ensuring that quality and that inclusion. So that's what we're waiting on.
Thank you for explaining that, because I'm sure there's also a lot of people from Ontario who have tuned in today, and I mean, maybe parents who are curious what's happening with the problem, exactly with that, with those discussions. Brendan did have a second question, which I think is a good one to make sure that we air here is, so, if you're waiting for that homework, as you mentioned, and just wondering about whether or not there will be able to be a deal by the end of the fiscal year, and if there's sort of a concern about not, like, are there consequences to it not being an agreement by the end of the fiscal?
Well, look, I mean, I said I'm optimistic because fundamentally I'm an optimistic person. And certainly I've heard from the province that they do want to do this, and they're saying the right things, but I haven't yet seen the action, because if, it is still possible, certainly, but tomorrow is March 1st. The end of the fiscal year is March 31st. There's still work to do after we get the action plan, because that is the document that then becomes the basis of negotiations to get to the agreement. That being said, what I've experienced in the agreements that I've negotiated with other provinces and territories is that, once the decision has been made that a province really does want an agreement, we can move very quickly. But we're running against the clock, and I don't really think it's fair to Ontario parents to have to keep waiting like this. We personally, I'm a mom in Ontario, right? I think that there are a lot of parents for whom having this kind of certainty in terms of what their daycare fees will be really important for them. So yes, can we get it done? Absolutely. I mean, I've got my sleeves rolled up. I'm ready to do the work. I just need to, get that action plan so that we can really get those details ironed out so that we can get something before March 31st.
Thank you. So we've been getting a lot of questions about private care. So some people are, very supportive of the role the private sector plays in offering, high quality licensed childcare, and others maybe not so supportive. So could you explain what role for-profit care will play in the agreements?
Yeah, so it depends on each province and territory. Each one has done things a bit differently. What our position has been at the federal government is that any existing licensed care would qualify for operating cost subsidies. And so that doesn't distinguish between whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit. However, our objective is for growth in the sector to be in the not-for-profit space. And I think as people can appreciate that if we are putting public money into a new system and new spaces, that those be funded in a not-for-profit kind of way. There are different approaches in different provinces depending on the regulatory framework. So, for example, in PEI, there is virtually no distinction between for-profit and not-for-profit because it's so tightly regulated that there's very little profit in the private sector. We also include in the not-for-profit bucket any home-based care. So those are often private operators, but they fall under the not-for-profit bucket. And so it really depends on the province or territory what their expansion plans are. But every operator that is currently licensed is eligible for operating subsidies and for fee reductions. But again, how that is rolled out depends on the province or territory.
We have a question from Janet, and I know you spoke a little bit about this, but I think it's, probably, I mean, this again is sort of one of the big themes and the questions I think that we will continue to see, and you'll probably continue to get, is around, will you hold firm in Ontario that no funding will go to new commercial childcare or unlicensed home care? Are there sufficient funds to expand new spaces? Because this is essential.
So yes, there are sufficient funds to expand new spaces. And I think, in Ontario in particular, it actually has a very different makeup than the rest of the country. So in Ontario, I think it's close to 80% of existing licensed care is either not-for-profit or home-based care. So they really do have a much stronger not-for-profit sector in Ontario than many other provinces or territories. And the hold and the commitment is that yes, fee reductions have to be in the licensed sector, and that's why you see provinces like Saskatchewan, for example, that are trying to use this as a carrot to bring more providers into the licensed sector. Because and I know we're talking about Ontario, but just on Saskatchewan for a second, one of the conversations that I had with families in Saskatchewan was, their preference is to have their children in the licensed sector. They just can't always find a spot. And so it really is important for us to make sure that all of the fee reductions are in the licensed sector to try and encourage as many providers as possible to get licensed.
One of the questions that we have here is around the Ontario childcare community, right? And how, what can they do to support you in signing a strong agreement with Ontario? Specifically, I think also want to make sure that the wage scale piece doesn't get lost in this, right? And I think we haven't really talked about that as much. I know you talked about it in your remarks, but I think it's certainly the case that, as we've seen, and again, the pandemic really brought this to light, and that when we look at often those who are caring for our youngest and our oldest in society, we tend not to compensate those individuals for those professions, right? In a way that many would say we should be doing, right? When you look at the work they're doing and how critical it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if there's anything this pandemic has taught us, which I think many of us knew before, but it came into, a glaring reality for us, was how important the caring economy is to the functioning of society, and how undervalued and underpaid our professional carers are, particularly our ECEs and our PSWs, not to mention others who are in that economy. But absolutely, I mean, this has been something that's underpinned many of our agreements, is ensuring that there is a wage grid in place for ECEs, ensuring there are professional supports in place. And as I mentioned in my remarks, I mean, you don't have a childcare system without childcare providers, right? We don't have a childcare system without our childcare workforce. And across the country, it is felt in every province and territory, in every jurisdiction, that there is a labor shortage when it comes to ECEs. So we have to do more to attract people to the profession. And part of that is valuing it, right? Part of it is saying this is a valuable career that we care about as a society, and that we think is important. And so that means you have to be fairly compensated. And it means that we need to do professional development throughout their career as well. So last week in Manitoba, we made a very exciting announcement on workforce supports, which included the province's wage grid, but it also included benefit supports. So, a lot of ECEs don't necessarily have a pension plan, or they don't necessarily have benefits. So Manitoba is putting that in place. New Brunswick is another example of an agreement that was very clear on trying to ensure greater wage supports for ECEs, not only to attract them to the profession, but also to retain them. And this is something that, we make clear in every negotiation that we have with provinces and territories. Now, it's a provincial jurisdiction to set what those wages are and to determine what the benefits may be. But we certainly impress upon our partners that this is something that's important for us as a federal government, but it's also important for the success of the program. So now for the Ontario childcare sector, keep talking about this. This is important. This matters. You matter. We learned in the pandemic that if we don't have childcare, it's really hard for our economy to function. Like really, really hard. So we have actually asked you to support the economy. So you are a strong and important stakeholder in all of this. And I know you're really busy caring for children, because taking care of little kids is a lot of work. But you need to keep speaking up, and you need to keep reaching out, right? Because you are, underpinning our economy. And quite frankly, we won't be able to recover from COVID-19 without you.
We've got a question here from Robbie, and I think it's a really interesting one. So I'm just going to read it as he's composed it. Parents have received a lot of support in the last 10 years. And the highest poverty rates are now with adults who don't have children. Does this investment limit the government's ability to support adults without children?
Well, it's a really good question, Robbie. And I would say that they are all pieces of a puzzle, right? The idea is not that you benefit one group of people over another. It is that you try to provide supports to people across the spectrum of society. So I'm the minister responsible for childcare. So I'm obviously very, very passionate about childcare, and I see the spin-off benefits, right? Including, something that I mentioned for senior single women. I remember when I was knocking on doors in 2015 during that election, and the number of single senior women that I came across who were living in quite abject poverty. And part of the reason is because they didn't have that long-term earning capacity. And often they were widowed, and maybe they didn't have access to a pension or a very reduced pension benefit. When it comes to adults without children, that's one of the reasons why we've enhanced the Canada Workers Benefit, because we recognize that there are a number of workers in this country who are working low-wage jobs who are still not getting out of poverty. They're working extremely hard, right? Like, we can't say they're not working hard. They're working extremely hard in jobs that we depend on as a society. And that's why the Canada Workers Benefit is important, to help people who are working be able to make ends meet.
One question here. What's the most challenging aspect of implementing this policy?
Oh, it's a great question. Well, it's fairly early on, so I think it's a difficult one to answer because we're early on. I think the fee reductions are one of the easier parts of it, because you can do that pretty quickly. I think what's harder is going to be two parts in particular. I think the addressing the workforce issue is going to be challenging, because as I mentioned in my remarks, I mean, if we're talking 30 or 40,000 new childcare workers, we have to do a lot right across this country to attract them into this profession and then to keep them there. And this is going to be a challenge for provinces and territories, particularly those who have ECEs in their education system. I've certainly heard from a number of my counterparts across the country that as soon as they get an ECE to come to childcare, they're kind of scooped up by the education system, because they offer better pay and better benefits. So that's something that needs to be addressed, and a number of provinces are trying to level the playing field there so that they can keep people in the childcare setting. And then that is also going to be one of the challenges in terms of growing the sector, because you have to have the workforce to grow the sector. So these are all things that we are thinking about every single day to try and get right. And it's one of the reasons why we have negotiated 5-year agreements, because those 5-year agreements have specific benchmarks in place so that we can track and measure progress, but also so that we can reevaluate and pivot as needed. And what we've asked from the provinces and territories is to send us their 2-year detailed plan within that 5 years, but the 2 years is kind of really important. And then we get together after 2 years and say, okay, how have we done? What have we managed to accomplish? And where do we need to revisit this? Because we are building a brand new system in Canada. It's very exciting. It's very, very exciting, but it won't be without challenges. It's not going to roll out perfectly. I have no doubt that there's going to be bumps along the way. And so that's why we have been very, very clear that we're creating a federal secretariat to work in partnership, in collaboration with provinces and territories, so that we can support each province and territory as they do the implementation, because ultimately childcare is a provincial or a territorial jurisdiction, but we want to be there to be a collaborative partner along the way.
Yeah, and I think sort of, again, if I think about the pandemic and some of the things that we've seen, we've actually seen some really interesting workforce development collaboration between provinces and colleges, institutes, technics, where, like, I think about in the PSW case here in Ontario, right, the college system getting together to work with the province to run accelerated PSW training, right? Could something be similarly done, right, where you take the curriculum, make sure all the requirements are being met, but offer it in an interesting, accelerated way, offer it in a way that also maybe pays students for placements. What are the things that can be done to attract individuals into the career path and to help them get there quicker? So I think there's some really neat things that maybe be able to build on that we've seen actually related to healthcare related sectors, the caring economy, that maybe could be used to help in some of those instances when I think about you talking about how that's going to happen across the country.
Absolutely. And in fact, I mean, we're starting to see that in different provinces and territories where they're working, particularly with their college system. I'm going to go back to Manitoba just because we made that announcement last week, but, they're working with their colleges on providing bursaries for ECEs. They have like 3 levels. They have childcare assistants, ECE 1s and ECE 2s, depending on what they're doing. But for childcare assistants, for example, they're reimbursing the cost of their materials. So there's many different things that provinces and territories can do that are creative to get more people into the workforce, incentivize them, and then get them to stick around as well. Because what I've certainly heard from ECEs is that they love their work. They absolutely love their work and they want to stay in the field. It's just sometimes economically it doesn't make sense for them.
So I'm going to squeeze in one more question here. So the last question is, how will you ensure that the funding provided is going to lead to a consistent level of quality across the country?
Oh, excellent question. So in each of the agreements, we have reporting requirements for each of the provinces and territories. Of course, again, provinces and territories design and develop and implement their own curriculum, but we engage quite robustly with them, and we will be requiring reporting and data on the quality of their early learning and childcare. And then I would say that stakeholders have a really important role to play in this. Whether you are, parents, whether you are researchers or academics or the media, in terms of, really holding all of us to account, provinces, territories, and the federal government for how this rolls out. I think that's going to be really, really important. And as I've said, in each of the announcements that I've made, particularly to stakeholders and those that have been advocating for this national early learning and childcare system for well over 50 years, is that I'm really sorry, but the work is not over. It's actually just begun. And so even though we finally gotten to this place where, we've got 12 agreements in place, $30 billion on the table for the next 5 years and $9 billion on an ongoing basis thereafter, we still need your help to make sure that we roll this out in the right way, in the best way that's going to support our kids and our families and our economy in the best way. So if you've been advocating for 50 years, you don't have to advocate for the system anymore to be created, but now you have to keep up the advocacy and the monitoring and all of the engagement to make sure that it rolls out in the best way possible.
So before we close out our conversation, I just wanted to give you, Minister Gould, the opportunity for any last words. Is there anything we didn't really get to that you wanted to make sure you had a chance to share with the audience before we thank Leuna for being involved with this event and helping to bring this conversation forward?
Well, just thank you so much, Kelly, and the entire team at the Empire Club, and of course, Leuna for sponsoring today's event. I hope it came across, despite my COVID diagnosis, the level of energy and passion and excitement that I have for this Canada-wide early learning and childcare system, because it really is going to be transformational. I mean, the economic opportunities, not just on an individual basis for parents, for women, for families, but for the economy as a whole, are really, really exciting. I mean, when it comes to labor force, when it comes to what this means for our GDP, what this means for our collective prosperity, and then at the base of all of it is what it means for our kids. Minister Freeland likes to say that she wants to create a generation of super kids. Well, this is where that question about quality, about early learning, about development comes into play. And I just think that this is such an exciting opportunity that is a triple win. It's a win for our kids, it's a win for parents and families and women in particular, and it's a win for the economy. So I'm really excited to see how this plays out. And I'm really excited to see 25 years from now what this has done to the Canadian economy and to Canada. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Minister Gould. Yes, exciting times ahead. And I can assure you the energy level, the excitement is definitely palpable. I'd like to now take the opportunity to welcome Victoria Mancinelli, the Director of Public Relations, Marketing and Strategic Partnerships at LeUna, to deliver some appreciation remarks. Victoria, welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Kelly. On behalf of LeUna, we represent over 140,000 members who build and strengthen Canada across various sectors, including the construction, industrial, and healthcare industry. As we work to attract talent to areas of the skilled trades and various sectors that we represent, and continue to amplify opportunities for women in the workforce and caregivers who are re-entering the workforce, we have to continue to look at barriers that remain to not just attracting the talent, but also to retention and a path for advancement, which includes accessible childcare. I want to take this opportunity to thank you, Minister Gould, for your remarks today and for your continued leadership and voice for children and families across our country. It remains evident that affordable, quality childcare is vital to supporting families and skills development of our children. It is a critical element in strengthening our current and future workforce, as well as playing an important role in growing and strengthening our economy. So on behalf of LeUna, we want to thank you again, Minister Gould, and we look forward to continue working with you to build a resilient future for Canada. And back to you, Kelly, for closing remarks.
Thank you. And thanks again to LeUna and to all of our sponsors for your support. Thank you to our guests and everybody who joined us today or who will be watching later on demand. Our next virtual event is on March 8th at 12 noon Eastern Time. Join us as we celebrate International Women's Day with a stellar panel, including the women behind the largest tech IPO of 2021, the acquisition of one of Canada's most innovative exchanges, and the strategic transformation of Canada's largest specialty toy and bookstore, all in conversation with the Globe and Mail's Rita Trisher. More details and complimentary registration are available at empireclubofcanada.com. This meeting is now adjourned. I wish you a great afternoon. Take care and stay safe.